Thank you for turning to page 121. Today we're going to talk about the process I use to set up maybe a one-night dungeon adventure or D&D adventure for my group. I'm going to go through the process that I use, and it really doesn't vary much based on level. If it's brand new first level all the way up to very high level, the process is really close to the same. So I'm going to go into some details about how I do it. A couple of the tools that I've used over the years for it: Book of Lairs 1 and 2 from 86 and 87, both written for first edition. Very valuable things to have at your fingertips. They're a PDF that's available on DriveThruRPG for $3 each. I consider it quite the bargain. I'm going to go into more detail on these as we go along. I'm also going to talk about my subscription drive. Getting close. Getting close to the 1,000. I need a little bit more. Thank you for everybody who is subscribed already. If you know anybody who's on the fence, bring them over to our side. We talk about gaming a lot. I also want to mention that I've got a Patreon going. I've got my first patron reward coming out late May, early June, and it's going to be the first part of a serialized dungeon I'm writing for AD&D First Edition. It's my first time writing for someone else to actually read my stuff, so it's an adventure for both of us. So far, it's going quite well. I've got a fair piece done of it, and in the next few weeks, I'll be issuing the first part. Also, just want to let you know that down the line, I also have planned a Traveler reward for Patreon, but I'll go into that in the Traveler videos. So that's all I've got to say today, but back to the point at hand. We're going to take a look at running a one-night dungeon for AD&D here on page 121. So you've settled in and you've decided you're going to be the DM for your group. And you've decided that maybe just as a get acquainted kind of game, it'll be a one-nighter. And what I'm about to actually talk about is my process for how I would prepare for a one-night game, and whether it's one that I maybe intend to maybe build into something more, or I'm going to just kind of leave it at that one-nighter and then that'll be it, and maybe I'll go on something else from there. And what I'm also going to be talking about really will apply at almost any level as far as the preparation I do. I've been using this. I've DM'd, of course, brand new starting campaigns, many middle level campaigns, some of the higher levels, and even up to ridiculously high level stuff. But the basic process is almost always the same. So for a one night game, the first thing I'm going to want to know is how many players do I have? The second thing I'm going to want to know is what their characters are. So if it's a brand new group, I want to find out what everybody's going to be playing. As long as I have the character classes, I don't really care about individual stats for a brand new group, because ultimately, let's figure it out. Let's face it, they don't matter. So once I know how many I'm going to be running and what characters they're going to be playing, the next thing I need to know is how long the game's going to be. What's my time slot? I'm going to use our time slot, which is what we primarily play in our group these days, which is 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. on a weeknight. Once in a while, we'll do a longer Saturday game or even a late Sunday game, but mostly we'll stay to the 7 to 10. So that's a 3-hour window. So in a 3-hour window, I am going to go out how I would plot out for a 3-hour game, how I do plot out for a 3-hour game. First things first, you're looking at our old friend graph paper. I actually prefer graph paper with a little bit bigger square pattern myself, but this will do. I still draw my dungeons on graph paper. I've started vectoring a little bit, but my raw dungeon is always on graph paper. In the old days, we used to hand the player group a blank piece of graph paper, and we had somebody in the group who was designated as the map maker. And that person would have the responsibility of, you walk into a room and the DM would describe the room. The door is, before you, and immediately to your right is a wall that goes 20 feet parallel to the door, and then 30 feet up, and then squares off the room 20 feet on the left, and then it all squares off. So the player would actually have to draw that. We did that for the first many years I played D&D, probably the first decade. But once we were all more experienced and the groups got smaller and everybody got a lot more able at the game, we kind of did away with the map maker. It just wasn't really necessary anymore. What I will do is the players will be going through the dungeon, and I'll have prepared a partial map for them after they've done some of the encounters. And that way I can hand them the map and they can put whatever notes they want on the map. but they don't have to sit there and go through the tedium of me describing each and every room as they draw it. In all the years I ever did that, by the way, I only had one map come out exactly the same as I described it. So it was a hard process to do, and it's an old one. It's not one I use anymore. Interestingly, we still do use the concept of secretary. Secretary in our group is the one who keeps track of any group treasure. So how much coin the entire group gets, if there are any group magic items that end up going into a pot for the group to sell, or, there's 2+1 swords. Everybody's got that or better, so the 2+1 swords go up for sale. The group secretary for us has to track all that stuff. And we do it as kind of a competition. You have to yell, "Not secretary," when you're seated or when you're getting ready to sit down at my table before everybody else, or you're the secretary for the night. Sorry, Craig, you're almost always secretary. Craig usually gets here about 2 or 3 minutes before 7, which usually makes him the last one here. And by the time he's gotten in the door, they've already yelled, "Not secretary." Secretary is not that big a job in our game anymore. It used to be a pretty big one, but it's not anymore. But it is kind of a friendly competition as to who can get out of being secretary for the night. It's kind of fun. It used to be that people would even call me the afternoon of the game and call me and just say, "Not secretary." I have banned that because it really wasn't fair if someone was at work and they weren't able to call. So then we made it that you have to be in the physical building where we're having the game, and then you could say "Not secretary" anytime after you've gone into the building. In this case, my house. As soon as they come in the house, they say "Not secretary," and Craig usually ends up with it. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my actual process. Usually whenever I'm developing a dungeon, I develop it in a spiral-bound notebook. I keep these, and when I get through them, I go ahead and I retire it and start a brand new one. This way I keep all my notes, and I have my notes available to me for research if I have to look into something I did before in my game. For this particular one, I had to go back to November 10th of 20. It was the last time I really ran just a game I designed as a one-nighter. And so what I did here, this is an encounter, or a dungeon called Redbrook's Haven, and it was for 4th to 8th level. So I wrote up an outside encounter, and again, this is 4th to 8th level. I knew it was going to be a one-nighter, and I put in a couple of bandits with an MU, and then, I have a hallway encounter, and then room 1 was the room of doors, the entry door of many faces, and then I go ahead to here, to the various encounters, and then finally a little list of magic items. So that's really how I keep my notes. If I have to do more to discuss what the room is going to look like, or a lot more description or anything like that, I'll write that in here as well. Generally, I'll have that in my head, and I'll just put a few notes to remind me as I'm DMing, but I'm not huge for writing down each and every detail on a dungeon that I'm writing for myself. I have those ideas in my head, and I just kind of wing it from there. As to magic items, I had potions separated from this miscellaneous stuff that I was giving out, and I was running this game for 5 people, so I went ahead and I decided, everybody would get a potion, everybody would get 1 miscellaneous item. So again, this is 4th to 8th level. This is fairly low power, and that was the idea. I knew the characters that were coming in, the classes, but I wasn't familiar with the actual characters themselves. So the way I set the dungeon is, if it's a 3-hour game, I will generally set approximately 2 encounters per hour of the game. So the first hour I'm counting on two encounters, the second hour another 2, the third hour another 2. So for a 3-hour game, I'm going to write up 6 definite encounters that the party will have. I then will put in about 1 additional encounter per hour, for a total of 3 per hour, of random monster encounters or something. If I've mistimed something and I need to pad it out a little bit, I want to have those monsters at my fingertips and ready to go in my notes, rather than have to stop and think something up on the fly. So I would always over-design them rather than under-design based on my time slot. So a time slot for me, again, 3 hours, would be roughly 2 set encounters per hour with 1 backup encounter per hour. The way our game runs, we start at 7 p.m. Usually Craig will get here right at 7. Roy will be here a little bit earlier than that. And we'll get started, but we always have the "Hi, how you doing?" catching up, which usually means my game doesn't actually start till sometime between 7:05 and 7:10. That's never a problem. I design my games to do that. We are friends after all. We want to say hey and ask how things are going. So once my game is running, I have a little clock I keep in my head. I don't usually write this on my notes, although you can. And I will set a point. Okay, it started at 7. My midway point of my game is 8:30. I want to be at X point by 8:30. So for instance, this one that I'm running, the outside encounter is going to be a pretty quick encounter. And then I've got 3 skeletons manning a ballista that's going to fire up the hallway. That's a good old-fashioned D&D one. The one that's going to eat up a lot of time here is going to be the Room of Doors, because the entry door is a door of many faces. I believe this is out of Encyclopedia Magica. And I wrote up what the doors do. So then I know that this is going to easily be my first hour. This will probably be closer to my first hour and a half. So about 8:30 or so, I would want to be going into my first set of encounters. I don't generally set magic items in specific areas. I used to, but I stopped doing that to give myself a little more flexibility in case I find out that a player has, he doesn't have a magic sword, for instance, and it's a 4th to 8th level game, and I feel, hey, maybe he should get a +1 sword. I will generally go ahead and keep the magic kind of loose so I can just plug it in wherever I need it. So then you see here I've got 5 more encounters, plus the 3 up front, so that's 8 encounters that I set for a 3-hour game. And again, the 9 is a decent recommendation, but I knew this Room of the Door of Many Faces was going to eat up a lot of time too. This game went right on the tip, right at 3 hours. We were done at 10 o'clock. And then I went ahead, I give out the magic items as they take the encounters, and I'll say, okay, there's 1 potion in the loot you get, and 1 miscellaneous item, and then I'll let them throw. Or I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. In this case, I would say, okay, you find a potion and a dagger. And then, so they'll say, okay, and they'll go ahead and they'll throw a D20 each, and the highest person gets to pick which they want. Do they want the potion or do they want the miscellaneous? So if that person takes the miscellaneous and it ended up being a +2 dagger, and there were 2 of them, hey, great. They get 2 +2 daggers. And then the next item would be rolled for the potions. And then the winner of that roll on the D20 would go ahead and get the potion, in this case, potion of fire breath. Then I have little uses here of how many uses each of these has. I wrote that up as I was doing my dungeon prep. So, and then any miscellaneous little notes here. Wally is my black cat. His birthday is on November 11th, and my character Kirk was rolled up November 11th, 1980. So this was really close to his 40th anniversary. So that's really my prep for a dungeon. Again, it's 2 encounters per hour with a backup encounter per hour. So if you're running, an 8-hour dungeon, I would recommend having 4-hour dungeon, I would have 8 set encounters and 4 backup encounters. The other thing is, the longer the dungeon goes, the more you actually need to over prep it. If I'm prepping for a 6-hour slot, for instance, I would probably prep 3 standing encounters for each hour. So that'd be 18 encounters, plus I would prep another 5 or 6 random encounters that I could inject, because the longer the game goes, the more it plays with your time frame. So that's a quick thumbnail of how we go about playing, writing up a dungeon and developing it. So I hope that's helpful to anybody that's out there. That's just the method I've used. And as I said, this works pretty well for brand new first level all the way up through the highest level I've found. Just setting it based on how many hours you're playing has always worked for me. But if you're really in a time crunch, or maybe you're somebody who likes to run pre-generated adventures, one-nighters can be kind of hard to come by. Most modules are written for multiple things. That's where the Book of Layers comes in. This was published in 86 and 87 for D&D first edition, and these are really nice. They're a bunch of different encounters, a bunch of different dungeons or adventures, if you will. There's the table of contents, and the idea is that you would have a variety of adventures, a variety of settings: mountains, hills, forests, swamp and jungle, steppes and plains, a village, desert, and aquatic. So you can go ahead and you can set up anywhere you want, and you just read the adventure in here and then go from there. So if you're looking here, it's set up just in the same format as Dungeon Adventures was, and this was out when Dungeon Adventures was still fairly new. They were only about 2 years old when the first of these was published. And I actually prefer these to the old Dungeons simply because the writing in this and the editing in this is much tighter. It's much better than what we saw later, or saw during the run of Dungeon Magazine. If you saw my review of Dungeon Magazine, you know I wasn't a huge fan of it until Paizo took it over and we got the Mega Adventures. I never liked the uneven writing that was present in it. So here you go. This could just be like a little one-off outdoor encounter if you wanted to with this Ogre Mage. It's a one page. You've got shadows, you've got zombies, and it says here what level they should be. Against the shadows, they should be 24 levels, average of 4th level. So 5 or 6 characters, somewhere around 4th to 6th level. Zombies, 83 zombies, 6 mummies, bunch of undead here. That's a high level one. 5th level, brigands. You get all kinds of good stuff. So these are really handy. They're also available on DriveThruRPG for a whopping total of $3 each for the PDF. I really recommend these if you're a DM who's going to be looking to either start up a new group, or you're maybe getting back into it for the first time, or you just like running pre-generated adventures as a time-saving device. These are really nice. They're well presented. They're well written. My son went off to college a few years ago and started up a D&D group. I loaned these to him, and he used them extensively with his new group just to get the game up and going. If he was really busy with school or whatever, he always had these to fall back on. I have run a few of the adventures out of both of these books. I have also just taken a bunch of ideas out of here and written them in my own scenarios. I'm not proud. I live from anything. So that's really my process. I hope that answered everybody's question as far as how I go about it. I realize mine is not the only way to go about it. It's just the way I've found works. I DM a lot of games per year, and I've been doing it for over 40 years, so I found a method that works really well for me. That doesn't mean it's going to work well for everybody. This is just the way I do it. So that's it for today from page 121. I hope you enjoyed what you saw and heard. If you have any questions or comments, polite criticisms, please leave them below. Please remember the subscription drive that I'm doing right now, and of course the Patreon. So that's all I've got to say today. Thank you for watching. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you next time on page 121.